The Russia-Ukraine war is now into its third year. The initiative, the strategic initiative, very clearly had passed from the Ukrainians to the Russians last year. And that had happened because Russia had at long last mobilized in the end of September 2022. Russia, as we all know, had gone in with just 150,000 troops and had achieved the bulk of its limited objectives. It had taken 60% of Donetsk, 90% of Luhansk. It had taken a land corridor to Crimea. It had, taken all the ports on the Baltic Sea and Azov Sea coast, less Odessa. The problem was that Putin had initially laid down that he did not, as a strategic long-term objective, want to alienate the Ukrainian cousins beyond a point. He wanted to set the pace for a negotiated settlement, a dialogue which would not bring relations to a breaking point. Unfortunately, all his attempts to broker peace, to go in for peace, immediately in March 2022 itself, he had held dialogues first in Belarus, then in Turkey, and they had more or less agreed to a ceasefire, and as a token goodwill gesture, Russia had even withdrawn its troops from the gates of Kyiv. This was taken advantage of by the Western information warfare machine to show the Russian invasion as a dismal rout, etc., etc. All that is history. Then, carried away by their own rhetoric, the United States, the NATO allies, they pressurized Ukraine to now launch a counter-offensive and throw Russian forces out of the captured territories in Ukraine. The simple fact is that the anchor premise of this operation was that Russia would not correct its manpower imbalance. The Russians had 150,000 troops. Towards the end, they had withdrawn, rotated troops. Just 90,000 were left in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian armed forces had gone up to about 550,000. So quite obviously, when you have that many more troops, you have that many more options. And this began to tell heavily against the Russians. Like I said, it's history that Putin was forced to mobilize 300,000 reservists, which held the Survek in line, and that has changed the entire strategic tone of this campaign. It is Ukraine that is now clearly on the losing side. It has lost all initiative. Russia is calling shots. Russia is putting pressure all along the front. In the winter, last year, it had mounted the winter offensive and finally succeeded in capturing Avdiivka. Now, they are waiting for the mud season, which is in March, April, to get over, because after the snow comes the mud. So, it is in the mud season that large-scale operations become very, very difficult to conduct. The rains, etc., they bog down your tanks and armored vehicles. No cross-country move is possible. You have to go along road axes, and that can be very costly given that you have drones, you have anti-tank guided missiles, you have HIMARS, etc. So, any predictable movement along roads is an invitation to disaster. Therefore, you have to, the right campaign season in Russia, in Ukraine is June, July, August. That is the period in which even the Ukrainians had launched their much heralded offensive last year. It was a dismal failure because they banged their head against very well built defenses, and they have taken extremely heavy losses, which are being estimated at almost 1 lakh, not the 30,000 that Zelensky has admitted to, but almost 1 lakh killed and about another lakh or so, lakh plus wounded. Given the much smaller manpower base of Ukraine, this is having a catastrophic effect. Now the new style of war that has clearly emerged, the advantage is clearly on the side that is able to carry out industrial mobilization in a far better manner than its adversary. If your industrial mobilization is superior, you will prevail. Number two thing is the ability to regenerate manpower losses. Because of the heavy usage of firepower, manpower losses are colossal, unprecedented scale of manpower losses reminiscent of World War I battles of attrition, World War II later stage battles of attrition, not the early blitzkriegs. So with these heavy losses, the war winning factor is your ability to mobilize, is your production of artillery ammunition. Now Estonia estimates that the Russian artillery ammunition production is 3.5 million rounds a year. It was in 2023, and this year it will go up to 4.5 million rounds of artillery ammunition a year. The Americans have tried to push up their ammunition production rate, and they have gotten to about 1 million rounds a year. The problem is that the Ukrainian Defense Ministry is asking for 12,000 rounds a day, 200,000 rounds a month. It is at best the United States and the NATO can supply about 1 million rounds a year, which will not be sufficient to meet the very extravagant demands of the Russians, but of the Ukrainians. But the fact is that that is the stark, bare reality check as far as ammunition is concerned, and ammunition will be the decisive factor. The next factor, like I said, would be the manpower resource base. The manpower resource base is required to rotate units from combat to peace stations to let them regain their breath, renew themselves, regenerate their losses, and then go back. So circulation of troops from combat to non-combat chores, number one. Making up heavy losses caused by heavy massing of fires, artillery fires, HIMARS fires, tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones. Every single vehicle that moves can be picked up and can be hit by this barrage of drones. Initially, the Ukrainians were the pioneers in this field, in this conflict, but the Russians have more than caught up. They bought a whole lot of very cheap Iranian Shahid drones. They have retrofitted them with GLONASS navigational equipment, their own GLONASS navigational satellites, which have increased their accuracy by tenfolds, and with the help of that they have been causing mayhem in Ukraine. Another new factor that is coming in is the FAB 2000, FAB 3000 types of guided glide bombs. These are dumb bombs which have been retrofitted so that they can glide onto their target, they can traverse, they can be fired off from standoff distances, they glide to their target, and they have strap-on guidance kits in terms of GPS sort of GLONASS guidance kits that make them very accurate. Their circular error of probability goes up many-fold, and these they have been using in Kharkiv to devastating effect. These were also used to some extent in Avdiivka, and they caused a collapse because of the heavy attrition, the heavy losses that they inflict over a period of time tend to wear down totally the enemy, the defenders. That is how they got the breakthrough at Avdiivka. Tough fought battle, but they managed it. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, very foolishly expended unnecessary resources in the prestige battle of Bakhmut. When it was a gone case, it should have been given up long ago. They not only fought very hard, but the Ukrainian general staff had quite an ID fixe on Bakhmut, and then they mounted major attacks on Bakhmut to try and retake it back and paid a very heavy price in the bargain. Then the Americans and the NATO allies prevailed upon the Ukrainian, in fact arm twisted the Ukrainian general staff. They helped them raise 2 new corps, with the help of which they thought they would achieve a breakthrough and they would push Russia back, where overtly optimistic flights of fancy. You see, you have to be objective on the battlefield. The battlefield is very, very unforgiving to people who are subjective, who make fancy estimates that do not fit the ground picture. Then you will come to grief sooner or later. Unfortunately, the United States, the West, got carried away by their own propaganda, by their own information warfare, very, very seductive presentations, and they actually started believing what their propaganda line. Quite obviously, who paid for it? The Ukrainians. The 9th Corps launched the first series of futile attacks. They were hardly able to get past the first defense line, and they suffered very heavy, unacceptable losses. The Americans, there was a lot of bitter recrimination between the two sides. The Americans then forced the Ukrainians to call off the Bakhmut offensive and concentrate all on trying to get to the Crimean coast. They have the idée fixe of taking back the Crimean Peninsula from the Russians. I'm afraid even the second attack by the 10th Strike Corps of the Ukrainian was a complete fiasco. The Challenger tanks, the German Leopard tanks, they all proved to be dismal failures. They were hit by Russian tactical aviation, especially their attack helicopters firing Vikhir long-range anti-tank guided missile. That's history. Now Ukraine has paid a very heavy price in terms of manpower. Industrially, Ukraine is no match for the Russians. Had it not been for this level of American and NATO support, Ukraine would have been finished almost in the first year of the war itself. Its entire armed forces that it started the war with have been destroyed. They have been rebuilt 3 times over. Its economy would have collapsed in the first year of the war itself. It has been rebuilt. But then all these, the chickens are now coming home to roost. How long can you stretch it out? Industrial mobilization wise, you are weaker, much weaker than the Russians, not only in artillery ammunition, in tactical ballistic missile production, cruise missile production of hypersonic Kinzhal and other missiles. The Russians are forging ahead. Their economy has been turned into a fully wartime economy on the pattern of World War I, World War II. The United States and the NATO have not been able to keep pace by a mile, whether in terms of artillery production, whether in terms of the production of replacement cruise missile, tactical ballistic missile. The Russian industrial superiority, military industrial superiority is now beginning to tilt the scale, compounded with the manpower losses that were caused onto the Ukrainian side because of strategic blunders, wrong operational planning, overtly optimistic operational planning has caused them to come to grief. Now, very respected American military analysts like Colonel McGregor, like Scott Ritter of the CIA, have been predicting an almost virtual collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces in the coming few months. The tide of the battle has turned. Russian attrition is slowly but inexorably wearing down the Ukrainian military machine. They are now all along the front putting pressure. They are not any major bright arrows like in the era of maneuver warfare, but there are minor arrows all along the front wherever they are making gains. And Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor feel very strongly that come the month of May, June, most probably June, July, when the mud season is over and the ground hardens to sustain tank maneuver off the road axis, the Russians will launch their major attacks. They will not mass forces, they will mass fires. And especially with this new series of glide bombs, they are in a position now to inflict a terrible amount of attrition on the Ukrainians. What is cause for serious concern is the degradation of the Ukrainian air defense capabilities. The Russians recently used 2 Iskander missiles to knock out an S-300 batteries. Now S-300 are originally Russian missiles. So in the Russian jamming inventory, they were more catered to jam Western radars and Western equipment. But they had not catered for jamming their own S-300 missiles. It now appears that the Russians have worked a way around this and they have started jamming these S-300, and because of that they have achieved a very successful strike in which an entire S-300 battery has been wiped out. A Patriot battery was also wiped out earlier and another one sent which has also been hit. So the air defense cover is now getting torn apart, and with that Russian tactical aviation will play an increasingly greater and more effective role. Like I said, they could push on all fronts, but the basic military options are threefold: Kharkiv, Kyiv, Odessa. These are the major strategic objectives they could go for. My personal take is that they will try and go up to the line of the Dnieper River to make sure that the HIMARS and the tactical ballistic missiles, the cruise missiles supplied by UK and Germany has refused to give them part with its Taurus, but the fact of the matter is that these are not within range of Russia's mainland proper. The Russians want to create a corridor sanitaire, which will push out all such long range weapons and fire capabilities well away from the Russian frontier. For that entails an advance to the line of the Dnieper River. Possibly, if they want to take Odessa, they will have to cross the Dnieper River and progress major operations that side. They could even go in for Kyiv command and control center to bring about a collapse, or definitely they'll go in for Kharkiv because this is a thorn in their side and makes it vulnerable in the Belgorod direction. What option the Russians will adopt is a matter now which time alone will tell. But the fact is, there are some speculations. One school of thought is that the Russians have not mobilized their further reserves. They are only carried out conscription. And you can either carry out, as we had seen in September 2022, you can either carry out conscription, which is the normal way of refilling your units with new recruits, or you can carry out call up of reserves. The Russian mobilization system is not geared to handle both. As of now, we have not seen signs of a major second Russian mobilization. There is nothing to prevent it. Putin has won the elections hands down. He has the mandate now to carry out a second mobilization, but Putin seems to be very keen to keep losses to the bare minimum and prevail by sheer attrition, by the sheer grinding process of attrition. The Russians have never been very sensitive about terrain. They treat terrain like the navies treat the sea. It is the end objectives that they are interested in. It is terrain that serves a purpose that they are interested in. Just acquisition of real estate has never been the Russian way of war. So all of these American military specialists, respected American military specialists, I have cited Colonel McGregor. I have a lot of regards for his tactical insight and acumen. Scott Ritter, very, very brutally honest. These are the only two American voices that, or some of the American voices which have been realistic in the course of this whole campaign. The others have focused, even very senior American military leadership like Petraeus and the others have focused more on promoting the information war agendas. In terms of brutally hard empirical analysis, it is individuals like Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor who have done a far more objective analysis and a more reasoned analysis. So they are predicting a collapse of Ukrainian morale. They are predicting a collapse of the Ukrainian ability to fight because of ammunition shortage. And there is one thing that compounds the ammunition shortage: wear and tear of the gun barrels. Gun barrels have limited lives. Medium artillery gun barrels life is about 2000, 2500 shells they can fire, and then that gun barrel has to be replaced. So about 150 to 200 gun barrels the Ukrainians will have to replace every month if they keep continuing at this rate and they want to fire 12,000 rounds a day. I am afraid they will have to cater for replacement of gun barrels. That will be a greater problem than replacement or receipt of ammunition, artillery ammunition. Your gun barrels have been, the guns have been firing non-stop. Their barrels will have to be replaced. The Ukrainians have a total zoo of artillery weapon systems from various NATO countries, from America, from France, from UK, etc., etc. So they would be hard put to find replacement gun barrels. NATO countries have already gone, scraped the bottom of the barrel to try and provide Russian era military equipment to the Ukrainians in the hope that they will get American equipment in return. But all that they could give has already been given by and large. They can scrounge between America, if America is able to give ammunition. That is a big if, because there is a log jam in the American Senate. So if America is able to give ammunition and the NATO together, they can just do about 1 million rounds a year. Compare this with 3.5 million to 4.5 million rounds being annually produced by the Russians, and the writing on the wall seems to be getting very, very clear. So what's in it for us? What are the lessons that India can take home? Military industrial mobilization. There was a time before the Kargil war that when we were desperately short of defense funds for modernization, we were scrounging on ammunition. We have to maintain certain ammunition inventories. At that stage, some decades back, we came to this thing, let's buy the equipment and let's go slow on the ammunition, maybe a war will not break out. Very dangerous, very, very dangerous. Thank God that has been made up, because now we are producing our own 155 millimeter artillery ammunition within the country. So this military industrial complex capability has to be built up to sustain wars of attrition, which will not be over in a matter of days. That entire paradigm that any India-Pakistan, India-China war will not last over a month is history. We've seen the Ukraine war last for 3 years. The conflict in the Middle East is into well past its 6th month. And if we have a fond hope that we can go back to that era of short duration, high intensity conflicts, it's over, it's dead, it's buried. Let's plan for the future. So military industrial mobilization. The military industrial complex in India has to be built up. Stockpiles have to be created so that you can stand out, you can withstand wars, two-front wars, worst case scenarios. To say that we will be so clever, we will never get to fighting a two-front war, is desirable end game. Very, very seductive it sounds on paper, but will your enemies oblige? Will your enemies oblige? If you are in a fight with Pakistan, will China oblige by not doing anything? And if you are in a war with China, you can bet your bottom penny that the Pakistanis will come in. So you have to be ready for the worst case scenario of a two-front war with a half a front of the Maoists and terrorists and the others operating behind you. Thank God that has been tamped down quite a bit. But a two-front war is within the realms of possibility, and to say that we will find very clever diplomatic solutions to it, we will bamboozle the Chinese, the Pakistanis into not intervening. They will allow us to, decimate the other in a standalone mode, I think is being overtly optimistic. And in military planning, you do not plan on optimist scenarios, overtly optimist scenarios. You plan on hard facts. You plan on the worst case scenarios so that you are in a position to deal with any lesser contingency. Military industrial mobilization, key takeaway. We are doing some very yeoman steps have been taken by the present regime in terms of military industrial build-up. We are manufacturing our own 155 millimeter guns. We've drawn up a list of 100 weapons systems that we will just not import from outside. They may be better, they may be worse, but we are building our own gun, and luckily for us, the ATAGS has proved to be a world beater design. It is a gun which is better than the equivalent American 155 millimeter howitzer. Like I said, that fires 3 rounds a minute, ours fires 5 rounds a minute. They fire up to 45 kilometer range, we fire up to 48. So we have shown what our private sector can do in tandem with the DRDO. The Tejas fighter is a success story. The BrahMos missile is a success story. The Indian Navy is building its own navy, not buying a navy, building a navy, and they are about to add a third aircraft carrier. We've got 2 nuclear submarines already. There are many more conventional air independent propulsion submarines on the way. So military industrial complex wise, we are doing better. We'll have to ramp up this in the anticipation of a conflict. We'll have to ramp up these facilities, especially ammunition storage. Generally, you don't want to store up too much ammunition unless you are very sure it will be used, because ammunition also has a shelf life, and then you have to get rid of overdate ammunition. But we know how to handle that and manage that. The second problem is what I have been stressing time and again, and every month of the Ukraine war reinforces the lesson, the importance of manpower. There was a school of thought in India which felt that manpower is a luxury, it is a waste of money and resources. We can suppress manpower and we should buy more weapons. I'd like to point out in all humility that Russia had no shortage of weapons and equipment. They had huge stockpiles of tanks and guns in their stocks, reserve stocks. What were they short of? They were short of manpower. They were forced to mobilize during the war 300,000 men, and now they may have to mobilize yet again, because one of the key problems is the way your units suffer attrition. Entire units are wiped out, have to be revived, resuscitated, rebuilt, rotated, turned around in the line. Unfortunately, I don't know for what reason, to cut costs. I understand cutting costs was required. After all, the pension bill of the Indian Armed Forces was more than the pay bill of the serving armed forces, and by a fair margin. So that was an unsustainable situation. Something had to be done, and the government did come up with the Agniveer scheme. This will have to be tinkered with. The other unfortunate thing is that during COVID, we suppressed manpower for 3 years. Every year 60,000 people retire, but no manpower was recruited to replace those who were being retired. And the Agniveer numbers as given out in the media are just 43,000, whereas 60,000 retire per year. So this entire effort at scaling down the manpower, that was okay for the pre-Ukraine war era. After the Ukraine war, if we still do that, it is dangerous, extremely dangerous. We will have to build up our manpower, and I am very happy to hear that the government is thinking in terms of increasing the Agniveer retention from 25% to 55%. It's a very big concession to common sense, and given the situation, wise men learn from the experience of others. Let us look around at what is happening. The Russia-Ukraine war has some very eminent lessons. We will have to speed up the induction of medium artillery. As I have been saying time and again, that during the Kargil war we were planning to mediumize the Indian artillery, base it on the standard caliber of 155 millimeter. That's still not been done. We need to speed that up, because medium artillery has turned out to be the war winning factor in Ukraine. Our inventory of tactical ballistic missiles, our inventory of cruise missiles will have to be enhanced. Our inventory of drones will have to be enhanced drastically. Drones are the future of war. We have seen they have changed the entire contour of war. It is very difficult now to have deep armored thrusts going in, because every single vehicle can be picked up and hit by simple $2,000 drones that will destroy tanks and vehicles worth millions of dollars. So drones have to be integrated in a very, very major way. I am glad that General Narwane had looked ahead and started this in his tenure as the Chief of Army Staff. I'm sure this is being carried forth in a very major way. We'll have to retrofit T-72 tanks, and also the T-92 tanks. We'll have to have the canopies on top. I'm sure that is also being done. Immediate lessons learnt. We cannot wait for this war to get over to get some official reports from Russia or Ukraine. You will not get them, number one, and all those reports are for external consumption. Their own internal assessments will not be given to you. So you have to learn on your feet while this war is on. You can't afford to wait, because there are some disturbing indications coming that China is getting aggressive, that China is chickening out of any thought of invading Taiwan and getting into a mess with the United States at least till 2027. So, to divert the attention of its people from their failing economy, sputtering economy, I wouldn't be too surprised if they carry out a minor adventure against India. So we have to be prepared, we have to keep our powder dry. If you want peace, be prepared for war. Thank you.